An hour and a half. That was the length of time Marcus Hill was forced to wait until the CO finally walked in and altered the course of his day. The glass doors of Highland Crest Bank slid open with a soft whoosh, releasing a rush of cool, conditioned air that spilled onto the busy sidewalk. The space outside was transformed by a blend of scents. The sharp tang of freshly brewed coffee intermingled with the delicate aroma of polished leather, evoking a sense of quiet efficiency and luxury. With a measured stride, Marcus stepped inside. He rolled his shoulders beneath his impeccably tailored blazer and exuded an air of quiet confidence. This was not a new experience for him. He had entered countless boardrooms, signed more deals than he could count, and built a company from the ground up. He had earned his place in any room, but today he needed the others to see it as clearly as he did. He couldn't think of anything to say to his subordinate sons-in-laws. There had been so much to say, more than he had been able to say to the company. His meeting was scheduled for 11 a.m. sharp, a time that demanded professionalism and punctuality. The bank's lobby itself was a carefully curated blend of modern luxury and timeless wealth. Rich mahogany desks, sleek glass partitions, and subtle gold accents caught the light in just the right way, serving as constant reminders that money and power resided within these walls. The space was designed not only to serve clients, but to impress them. At the reception desk, Vanessa, a woman with a neatly pinned bun and an air of practiced disinterest, glanced up as Marcus approached. Her nameplate simply read, Vanessa. "Welcome to Highland Crest Bank," she said in a clipped, almost robotic tone. "Do you have an appointment?" Marcus placed his leather portfolio on the counter with an assured hand. "I'm Marcus Hill. I have a meeting with Julia Carter at 11. Vanessa's fingers danced over the keyboard, and after a brief moment she looked up, her tone still neutral. "You're on the schedule. Please have a seat. Julia will be with you soon." Marcus nodded and moved toward the seating area, choosing a chair strategically positioned near the floor-to-ceiling windows. Outside, sunlight slanted across the polished floors, casting long, elegant shadows that seemed to stretch toward him as if welcoming his presence. In the lobby, a group of sharply dressed professionals gathered near the telephones. They engaged in animated conversations about market shifts and emerging investment opportunities, the kind of relaxed banter that came when one felt completely at home in one's environment. Marcus's fingers tapped lightly against his briefcase as he observed the scene. It was 10 a.m., and as always, he was early. Minutes slipped by. 11:05, then 11:15. At first, Marcus dismissed the delay as a minor inconvenience. Banks, he reasoned, were not immune to occasional scheduling hiccups. However, after 20 minutes had elapsed, he began scrutinizing the steady flow of people entering the building. A man in a crisp grey suit, perhaps in his early 30s, checked in with Vanessa, nodding politely as he passed by. Less than 5 minutes later, a young banker approached Marcus and, with a courteous smile, ushered him past the frosted glass doors leading to the executive offices. Shortly thereafter, a woman in a cream-colored blazer arrived at the reception desk. Marcus could tell from her demeanor that she too had enjoyed a friendly chat with Vanessa and was being led inside, without any apparent delay. Yet, despite the flurry of activity, Marcus's name had not been called. Glancing at his watch again, he noted that it was now 11:30 a.m. Something was amiss. Marcus's fingers tapped lightly against the handle of his briefcase as he observed the steady procession of people entering the executive area. Some moved with the confident air of those who knew they belonged, exchanging easy smiles, familiar nods, and firm handshakes with the bank's staff. Others, like him, sat patiently in the lobby. The difference was stark. Those individuals were promptly called into the inner sanctum while he remained in waiting, a discrepancy that stung with quiet indignation. He had been waiting for 35 minutes, despite his appointment being scheduled and confirmed twice. Meanwhile, at least 6 other clients had walked in after him and disappeared through the frosted glass doors without so much as an explanation. Throughout all of this, Marcus remained composed. He had dealt with subtle, unspoken barriers before, those delicate, invisible lines that allowed some to be treated as VIPs while others were left on the fringes. The polite apologies, "Oh, we didn't mean to keep you waiting, there must have been a scheduling mix-up, you know how busy we get," were all too familiar. Yet today, as he returned to the front desk, Marcus's expression was a study in quiet resolve. Vanessa looked up from her keyboard, her face as impassive as ever. "Excuse me," Marcus said calmly but firmly. "Has Julia Carter been informed that I'm waiting?" Vanessa exhaled softly, as if interrupted mid-thought, and resumed tapping at her keyboard without making eye contact. Marcus waited for some acknowledgement, perhaps a brief apology or an updated time frame, but she simply returned to her work. "Do you have an estimate for when she'll be available?" he asked, fighting to keep his frustration in check. Without much effort, Vanessa offered only a shrug. "It shouldn't be much longer." Marcus exhaled slowly, trying to steady his composure. It wasn't merely her words that troubled him, it was the lack of urgency, the evident indifference in her tone. Here he was, a man who had built a multi-million-dollar firm from scratch, forced to endure a delay with no real explanation, a mere soon. That rang hollow. Then, as if to underscore the injustice, he witnessed it happen again. A woman in a navy blue dress, carrying a designer handbag and engaged in a lively conversation on her phone, walked in. Her voice was light and easy, and as soon as Vanessa saw her, her posture changed instantly. Her tone softened, and her lips curved into a smile that seemed genuine. "Good morning, Mrs. Lancaster," Vanessa said in a noticeably warmer, more polished voice. The woman gave a polite nod, and barely pausing, a young banker appeared at her side, ushering her toward the back offices. No waiting, no questions, no "you'll be with us soon." Marcus let out a slow, measured breath. He had been left waiting for nearly an hour, while she had been attended to almost immediately. Turning back to Vanessa, he asked with quiet resolve, "So, do appointments really matter here, or is it just first come, first served?" For the first time, Vanessa's face betrayed a hint of discomfort. "I told you, sir. She'll be with you soon," she repeated, the word "soon" lingering. A promise devoid of commitment, a delay without a deadline. A word used to cover up what was really happening. Marcus glanced back at the frosted glass doors. It would have been easy to simply sit back down and wait another 30 minutes pretending nothing was wrong, but this was not merely about waiting. It was about being dismissed, about being made to feel insignificant. Marcus returned to his seat, forcing himself to remain calm. He had faced worse challenges. He had built his company from nothing, dealt with condescending investors, and been underestimated in rooms full of men who thought they knew better, but this was different. This wasn't about numbers on a spreadsheet or a business plan. It was about being ignored, as though his time and presence were unworthy of even a basic update. He checked his watch. 5 p.m. Over an hour had passed. Taking a slow, deliberate breath, he looked around the lobby once more. No one else was waiting. Every person who had walked in after him had been immediately attended to, led inside or at least acknowledged, except him. Across the room, a young teller chatted casually with an older man in khakis and a golf polo. Their conversation was light and easy, almost breezy. "Yeah, I told her to just walk in," the older man chuckled. "She doesn't even need an appointment, you know how it is," the teller laughed. "For Mrs. Lancaster, we always make exceptions." Marcus's grip tightened on the handle of his briefcase. So that was how it worked. Different rules for different people. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees as he stared at the polished floors. This was a test. Would he remain quietly in his seat, accepting being pushed aside, or would he make it clear that his time was just as valuable as anyone else's? Decisively, without haste or aggression, Marcus rose. He walked past the front desk and Vanessa's blank expression, heading straight for the frosted glass doors. "Sir," Vanessa began, but Marcus did not stop. He pushed open the door and stepped into a long hallway lined with private offices. Some doors were open, others remained closed. One thing was immediately clear: Julia Carter was not in a meeting. Instead, she sat alone at her desk, her fingers tapping at her laptop. When she looked up, her expression shifted from surprise to irritation. "In an instant, Mr. Hill," she said in a clipped tone. "You should have waited to be called." Marcus met her gaze evenly. "I did wait," he replied coolly. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Please, take a seat," she finally instructed. Marcus sat, not because she had explicitly allowed him, but because he chose to do so. Yet something told him that this conversation would not unfold as she expected. Julia's fingers twitched, as she rearranged the papers on her desk. Her carefully neutral expression betrayed a slight tension in her jaw, a flicker of irritation in her eyes. "I apologize for the delay," Julia said, forcing a smile. "We've been extremely busy today." Busy. The word busy hung in the air, laden with implications. Marcus recalled watching at least 6 clients being ushered in like VIPs while he had been left waiting for over an hour and a half. "Were you?" he asked calmly but firmly. "Because I counted several clients who did not have to wait at all, even those without appointments." Julia's lips pressed into a thin line. "I assure you, Mr. Hill, that wasn't intentional. There must have been some miscommunication. A scheduling mix-up, perhaps?" Marcus exhaled slowly, his expression unreadable. "Interesting." Julia cleared her throat, clearly eager to move on. She flipped open a folder and scanned its contents. "Now, let's discuss your loan application," she said, her voice regaining that polished, dismissive edge. "I've reviewed it, and while your finances are impressive, we have strict criteria for approvals given the current lending climate. I'm afraid we'll need additional assurances before we can proceed." Before she could finish, the door swung open and the energy in the room shifted abruptly. The hallway, which had been quiet moments before, filled with the low hum of voices, voices that carried weight and authority. 3 men in tailored suits entered, exuding the presence of the bank's top decision-makers. Marcus didn't need to guess who they were. These were the executives whose approval meant everything in a place like this. At the forefront stood a familiar face. Anthony Sinclair, CEO of Highland Crest Bank, a man who clearly knew Marcus well. Anthony's sharp eyes swept the room before landing on him. His face lit up with recognition. "Marcus," he said warmly, breaking into a smile. "What are you doing here?" Julia froze. Marcus stood and shook Anthony's hand firmly. "Hey, Anthony, it's been a while, hasn't it?" "It has," Anthony replied, clapping Marcus on the shoulder. "Still running Hill's strategies? Still growing it?" "Still growing," Marcus replied smoothly. Meanwhile, Julia stared between them, her fingers tightening around the folder on her desk. Anthony's easy smile faded as he looked at her. "How long has Marcus been waiting?" he asked. Silence followed. Julia opened her mouth, but no words emerged. Marcus let the silence linger, letting the weight of the moment settle over everyone. "About an hour and a half," he finally said. Anthony's face remained measured, though Marcus noticed a slight twitch in his jaw as he repeated, "An hour and a half? You had Marcus Hill waiting for an hour and a half?" Julia scrambled for an explanation. "There must have been a scheduling issue," she stammered. Anthony didn't even look at her. His focus stayed on Marcus. "You should have called me directly," he said. "I would have ensured you were taken care of." Marcus offered a small, knowing smile. "I didn't think I needed to." Anthony exhaled, shaking his head, and then turned to Julia. His smile had vanished completely. "Julia, please step outside for a moment," he said in a calm yet final tone. Julia's face paled. Her hands clenched into fists before she slowly released them and left the room. Anthony turned back to Marcus, shaking his head. "I don't know what happened, but I guarantee it won't happen again." Marcus said nothing. No words were needed. The door closed behind Julia, yet the tension in the room lingered. Anthony let out a slow breath and took a seat across from Marcus, while the other 2 executives exchanged silent glances. "This isn't how we do things here," Anthony finally said, his tone steady but clipped. Marcus tilted his head slightly. "Seems like it is," he replied evenly. Anthony allowed the statement to hang in the air, not arguing further, knowing that men at the top were adept at recognizing when something had gone wrong. In that moment, Marcus was calculating exactly how big a problem this was. He wasn't merely a walk-in client. He had built a multi-million-dollar consulting firm from scratch, and his reputation carried weight in high circles. People trusted his word, and now he had a story to tell. Anthony leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Tell me what happened," he said. Marcus did not mince words. He recounted every detail: the scheduled appointment, the interminable wait, and the way others were ushered in effortlessly while he remained on hold. He described Vanessa's dismissive tone, Julia's indifference, and how he was brushed off as if he were just another name on a list. Anthony and the other executives listened intently. When Marcus finished, a heavy silence filled the room before Anthony exhaled. "I appreciate you telling me," he said in a low, serious tone. And to be honest, I'm pissed." Marcus leaned back slightly. "Why?" Anthony released a short, humorless chuckle. "Because this is the kind of thing that wrecks reputations. We've worked too damn hard to build this institution's credibility, and now I have to clean up a mess I didn't even know existed." He turned to one of the executives. "Make sure Julia is removed from the floor immediately. We'll have a conversation later." The executive nodded and left without another word. Anthony then returned to Marcus. "Your loan application. I assume it was solid?" Marcus tapped his briefcase. "See for yourself." Anthony took the folder and flipped through it, barely making it through the first few pages before shaking his head. "This shouldn't even be in question." He glanced at one of the remaining executives. "Fast track it. I want an approval on my desk by the end of the day." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Just like that?" Anthony met his gaze steadily. "You should have had it 2 hours ago. I'm fixing the mistake." Marcus considered that this wasn't about generosity or merely making things right. It was about control, about damage limitation, and ensuring that the story ended here in this office before it spread further. Marcus understood that game all too well. Yet he was not willing to let Anthony off easily. "I'll accept the approval," Marcus said, standing, "but fixing this for me doesn't fix the real issue." Anthony's expression remained unchanged, though a flicker appeared in his eyes. "We'll have a long conversation about that," he promised. Marcus grabbed his briefcase, nodded once, and headed for the door. Before leaving, he made sure to meet Vanessa's gaze one last time. She no longer exuded the confidence she once had. Outside, the summer heat pressed against his skin as he stepped away from the bank's pristine exterior. The gleam of the building belied the cracks that had already formed inside. This wasn't just about a loan or even about Julia. It was about something much bigger, a pattern repeated in countless forms and places. It wasn't always loud nor overt, but it was always there, the assumption that some people belonged in those offices while others were forced to wait, quietly dismissed. Today, someone had to face the consequences. The next time Julia Kramer looked at her appointment list, she would think twice. Marcus checked his phone. A new email flashed on the screen. "Loan approved." A small, satisfied smirk crossed his face as he tucked the message into his pocket and walked toward his car. Respect isn't given, it's demanded, he thought. Today, he had received exactly what he deserved. If you've ever been made to feel that your time, your presence, or your business isn't valued, speak up. Don't wait for permission. Take your seat at the table, and if they try to keep you waiting, make sure they remember why that was a mistake. Over the next few weeks, as Marcus continued his work in building his firm, the encounter at Highland Crest Bank became a turning point. His story began circulating in business circles and local media. Colleagues and competitors alike took note of his calm defiance and the way he had forced the bank to acknowledge his worth. Marcus found that his experience resonated with many. Those who had been overlooked, those who had been dismissed. He began receiving calls from other professionals who shared similar experiences at institutions where unspoken rules favored some over others. This sparked discussions at industry conferences, and soon Marcus was invited to speak about the importance of respect and equity in business. At one such conference, held in a prestigious venue, Marcus recounted his experience at Highland Crest Bank. His measured, authoritative words struck a chord with the audience. "When you are forced to wait while others are promptly served, it is not just an inconvenience, it is a matter of respect," he said. The room fell silent as he described the subtle barriers constructed to keep certain voices from being heard. His story became a rallying cry for those who felt marginalized in the corporate world. At home, the experience had a profound effect on Marcus's relationship with Denise. Though he maintained a stoic exterior during the ordeal, in private he often reflected on the personal toll of being dismissed and underestimated. One late evening, as they sat together on their back porch under a canopy of stars, Denise reached for his hand. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. "Not just for what you achieved today, but for standing up for yourself and for everyone who has ever felt invisible." Marcus smiled, a mixture of relief and determination in his eyes. "This is just the beginning, Denise. Today, I demanded respect, and tomorrow, I'll insist that every institution treats people fairly." As the months passed, Marcus's experience at the bank continued to influence his work and outlook. He began collaborating with other professionals to launch an initiative aimed at promoting transparency and accountability in financial institutions. This movement, called Equal Access, sought to create guidelines and best practices to ensure that no client, regardless of background or status, would ever again be made to feel less than valued. Through seminars, workshops, and an online platform, Equal Access quickly gained traction, drawing support from industry leaders and even attracting local government attention. Meanwhile, Highland Crest Bank was forced to confront its own practices. Anthony Sinclair, the CEO who had once exuded unyielding confidence, now found himself under intense scrutiny from shareholders and regulators. In a series of high-profile meetings, he was compelled to issue public apologies and announce sweeping changes in customer service protocols. New training programs emphasizing respect and equality were implemented, and policies were established to prevent future discriminatory behavior. Although many within the institution initially resisted, over time, the bank's culture began to shift. Back in the bank's lobby, Vanessa's once impassive expression now carried hints of concern and reflection. Although she continued to greet clients with professional courtesy, there was a noticeable change in the way she handled appointments. Clients who had once been relegated to waiting were now given more prompt and attentive service. And while Julia Carter still maintained a measured tone during her meetings, the incident with Marcus had left its mark. Over time, she too began to adopt a more inclusive approach, ensuring that every client felt valued. Marcus's journey from that fateful day at the bank became emblematic of a broader movement, a movement that questioned entrenched hierarchies and demanded that respect be the baseline in every interaction. His story was not merely about a delayed meeting or a dismissive receptionist. It was about systemic biases that permeate institutions and the courage required to challenge them. In boardrooms, at industry conferences, and in everyday conversations, Marcus's experience served as a powerful example of how one person's determination could spark meaningful change. As Marcus's reputation grew, he was invited to participate in panels and round-table discussions on business ethics and leadership. In one memorable session, he addressed a room full of young entrepreneurs. "Respect isn't given, it's demanded," he told them, his voice firm and clear. "Never allow yourself to be treated as an afterthought. Your time is valuable, and you have every right to insist that your voice is heard." The audience erupted in applause, and many left that day inspired to challenge the small injustices they encountered in their own professional lives. Yet Marcus's journey was not without its challenges. Despite the positive changes, there were moments when old habits died hard. In quiet moments in his office, he sometimes reflected on that long wait, the dismissive glances, and the hollow promises that had nearly crushed his spirit. These memories fueled his resolve, reminding him that the battle for fairness was ongoing. Even as he faced resistance from established institutions, Marcus remained steadfast. His work with Equal Access grew steadily, eventually attracting media attention and earning accolades for his efforts to promote corporate accountability. In time, even Highland Crest Bank, once a bastion of outdated practices, began to transform. Shareholders noted improvements in customer satisfaction, and the bank's reputation started to recover. Anthony Sinclair, who had once been unyielding, became known for his willingness to listen and adapt. Though change was slow and met with resistance by some, the seeds that Marcus had helped plant were gradually taking root. One sunny afternoon, several months after the ordeal, Marcus returned to Highland Crest Bank, not as a disgruntled client, but as a guest speaker at one of its new workshops on customer service and inclusivity. Standing in the same polished lobby, he was greeted warmly by Vanessa and Julia, both of whom had visibly evolved in their approach. Anthony Sinclair introduced him to a small audience of bank employees and executives. "Today we have the honor of hearing from Marcus Hill, a man whose experience and perseverance have taught us valuable lessons about respect, equality, and accountability," he announced. Marcus stepped forward with a calm smile and addressed the room. "I stand before you not as a critic, but as someone who believes in the power of change," he began. "Every interaction, every meeting, every handshake offers an opportunity to show respect, to affirm that every client, every individual deserves to be heard and valued. I hope my experience serves as a reminder that our actions, however small, can have a significant impact." His words resonated deeply, and for the first time the room filled with a genuine commitment to change. As Marcus continued to champion fairness in business, his personal journey intertwined with his professional success. His efforts with equal access garnered praise from business leaders, community activists, and even government officials. He collaborated with regulators to develop new guidelines for financial institutions, and his advocacy work eventually led to the formation of a local commission on business ethics. For Marcus, the transformation was both professional and personal. His experience not only affirmed his own worth, but deepened his understanding of the challenges many faced in the corporate world. Late at night, as he sat in his study surrounded by awards, letters of appreciation, and media clippings, he often reflected on that fateful day at the bank. He remembered the frustration of waiting, the dismissive glances, and the cold indifference that had nearly broken him. But he also remembered the resolve that had grown from that experience, the quiet determination that drove him to demand his rightful place. Years later, the legacy of that day continued to ripple through Highland Crest Bank and beyond. The changes that Marcus had helped spark became woven into the institution's culture. New employees were trained not only in technical skills, but in empathy and respect as well. Customer service protocols were overhauled, and regular audits ensured that every client was treated with dignity. Marcus's journey served as a powerful reminder that respect must be earned, and sometimes demanded, and that every individual's worth should be recognized. If you've ever felt that your time, your presence, or your business isn't valued, let Marcus Hill's story inspire you. Speak up, demand respect, and never wait for permission to assert your value. In a world where unspoken rules often dictate who is seen and who is ignored, let your presence be known. Remember, your time is precious, and if they try to keep you waiting, make sure they know why that was a mistake.